We've all seen these before. High production values, stirring music, promises of purpose and transformation. The military selling itself like a product. But there's another layer of messaging we rarely see. The business of war itself. Defense contractors promoting their latest weapon systems to governments. Trade shows where missile systems are displayed like new car models with a shiny sticker that says battle tested. In 2008, the video game Metal Gear Solid 4 showed us something eerily similar. A world where private military companies advertise their services like consumer goods, where war itself becomes a branded product, and where the war economy now drives the world. At the time, this seemed like dystopian fiction. Today, it's our reality. The private military contractor industry is worth over $250 billion globally. War isn't just about politics, resources, and ideologies anymore. It's a business model with quarterly earnings and growth targets. War, and all the horror it brings, has successfully interlinked itself with the larger capitalistic models we operate under, and all the suffering they already cause. When game director Hideo Kojima envisioned a world where conflict itself became a commodity, he wasn't predicting some distant future. He was documenting trends already in motion. How did we get here? When did violence become so thoroughly commercialized? And what happens to us, to our societies, our values, our humanity, when killing becomes another margin that makes numbers rise? This is the story of how warfare became an industry, how violence became a product, how conflict became a commodity, and how information became a prison. Perhaps it's naive to say this, but there probably was a time when war had clearer purposes than today. Territory, resources, competing ideologies. But somewhere along the way, something fundamental changed.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
These weren't the words of a peace activist. This was President Dwight Eisenhower, former 5-star general. Yeah, imperialism America, we get it. Anyways, here is a US president warning Americans in his 1961 farewell address, not some random activist yelling at the clouds. Eisenhower saw something forming that troubled him deeply. A system where war becomes intertwined with profit. And by Vietnam, that system was growing. Despite mounting evidence the war couldn't be won, it continued for years. Too many corporations had too much to gain from its continuation. The Cold War was raging on with the Red Scare propaganda at its peak. Even with so many protests happening in the US to end the war, the bloody battles and atrocities continued. Soldiers killing, dying in the name of ideology, all while fueling this fully realized war industry with their lives. In Metal Gear Solid 3, set in 1964, we see the character Big Boss undergo a similar revelation. After his mentor is sacrificed as a political pawn, he has a profound realization. Soldiers aren't fighting for ideals. They're tools serving economic and political interests beyond their understanding. After the Cold War ended, something unprecedented happened. Military functions traditionally performed by nation-states began to privatize. Companies like Blackwater emerged, offering armed forces for hire. War was becoming a service you could purchase. The Metal Gear series imagined this transformation vividly. Big Boss creates Outer Heaven, a nation for soldiers who rejected being pawns. Later, we see the Patriots, formerly Cypher, a shadow organization controlling not just warfare, but other aspects of politics as well.
This mercenary business we've built, someday it's going to be a new driving force in the world economy. In the new age, armies won't be tied to states, and war will become a business. We'll be a valuable commodity. There'll be clients all over the world who need our services.
What's haunting isn't just how plausible this sounded, but how precisely it predicted what was already happening. Today, what Miller described exists. Defense corporations don't just sell weapons, they sell security solutions. They offer training, logistics, intelligence, cyber warfare capabilities, entire packages of conflict as a service. These solutions even extend to mass Big Brother type surveillance systems. Looking at you, UK. And brutal forms of police arming and training. Here's to you, America. The countless battles waged around the globe have fueled an insatiable demand for weapons and munitions, leading to a rise in private military companies. The question isn't whether war has become a business. That transformation is complete. The question is, what happens to us? To our values, our humanity, our very concept of peace, when conflict itself becomes necessary for economic growth? Metal Gear asked this question decades ago, and probably took a shot at answering it too. So since we're living through this right now, let's take a closer look at what we can glean from the story's eerily accurate predictions. To understand what makes this commercialization of war possible, and worse, acceptable, we need to examine something deeper. Something that Metal Gear Solid 2 recognized over 20 years ago in a scene that feels increasingly important with each passing year.
In the current digitized world, trivial information is accumulating every second, preserved in all its triteness. Digital society furthers human flaws and selectively rewards development of convenient half-truths. Just look at the strange juxtapositions of morality around you.
Billions spent on new weapons in order to humanely murder other humans.
In this scene, the protagonist Raiden discovers that his entire mission has been engineered by an AI system called GW. But GW isn't just manipulating Raiden. It represents how an entire society can be controlled.
You seem to think that our plan is one of censorship.
Are you telling me it's not?
You're being silly. What we propose to do is not to control content, but to create context.
Create context? And you think you're qualified to decide what's necessary and not?
Absolutely. Who else could wade through the sea of garbage you people produce, retrieve valuable truths, and even interpret their meaning for later generations?
That's what it means to create context.
I'll decide for myself what to believe and what to pass on.
But is that even your own idea?
This single line captures something profound about how power functions in the information age. What was once a hegemonic force dedicated to suppressing specific facts or ideas has now transformed into an entity shaping the environment in which those facts are interpreted. Think of it this way. Content is the information we see. Context is the frame through which we understand that information. When you control the frame, you don't need to control what's inside it. Think about when you see news about conflicts. We're rarely arguing about whether events happened. We're debating how to interpret them. Who's right or wrong? Was it a security operation or a massacre? Collateral damage or war crime? Strategic military target or hospital? The content, the event itself, might be the same, but the context completely transforms how we understand it. Rewind back to Al-Shifa hospital bombing in Gaza last year. Initially, there was an intense debate about who was responsible. Was it Israel? Was it a failed rocket by Hamas? But notice what wasn't being debated, whether bombing hospitals could ever be justified at all. That framework, that context, was already established. The context of justifiable war crimes. Months later, after dozens more hospitals were destroyed, the attacks barely made headlines. The context had shifted. What was once shocking became routine, part of the status quo.
This is clearly a war crime, an act of terrorism aimed towards a medical facility.
It's of course terrible that a hospital was hit. Internationally, I'm sure you can imagine a lot of people are also going to be saying that, well, Israel has hit a lot of hospitals in Gaza, and those must be war crimes too.
You need to remember that hospitals in Gaza were being used as terror headquarters. It's absolutely not the same.
How did the world allow such truths to be swept under the rug, forgotten, and later reframed as a norm? Isn't it insane that this video game scene from 2001 reads like a perfect description of our current information landscape? We've segregated ourselves into ideological communities where we argue fiercely about content, specific facts, events, or statements, while rarely questioning the underlying contexts that frame those arguments. Like Raiden, who discovers his mission was fabricated, we often fail to recognize the invisible frameworks shaping our understanding of reality. We debate policy details without questioning why certain options are realistic and others unthinkable. Consider phrases like war is inevitable, profit maximization is a company's primary duty, or violence is sometimes necessary for peace. These statements are all too often posed as facts, but in reality, they're contextual frameworks that limit what we can imagine. When our very thoughts are shaped by contexts we didn't choose, how free are our choices really? The war economy requires a specific context to function, one where endless conflict seems inevitable, where military solutions appear necessary, where certain lives matter less than others. By controlling this context, the system ensures its own continuation. So what does the game tell us about breaking out of this cycle? It showed us that the first step to be truly free is to first recognize the contexts that cage our thinking. The Patriots in Metal Gear were fiction, but their methods, creating contexts that make alternate realities unimaginable and certain questions taboo, are very real. The same way that these methods allowed Gaza to be under complete siege for 13 years before October 7th. But hey, the same way it normalized the economic sanctions, proxy wars, and suffering in Sudan, Libya, Yemen, and Syria. But hey, this region is just always troubled. The same way the Rohingya massacres occurred and were supported by a Nobel Peace Prize winner. The same way China created literal re-education camps to forcibly extinguish a minority. This is not even to mention the Russia-Ukraine war and the enormous war economy drivers on both sides, even more so in the West, and its rabid rush to use Ukraine as a proxy in its gambit to crumble the other side. And that's how our own war economy sustains itself, regardless of who's in power or what specific conflicts rage. To challenge the system, we must first see it. In 2024, the world's top 5 defense contractors generated over $190 billion in revenue. That's larger than the GDP of New Zealand, Portugal, or more than 150 other nations. War isn't just big money. It's one of the biggest businesses out there. It's one of the biggest businesses there is. It's important to stress this, because all too often does our media brush over this fact. When Russia invaded Ukraine, defense stocks surged. When the genocide started in Gaza, they climbed again. It's not speculation anymore. It's standard investment advice. Buy when there's blood in the streets takes on a disturbingly literal meaning. Today's weapons are showcased at trade exhibitions like cars at an auto show. The selling point? They're battle-tested. A sanitized way of saying, we've already used this to kill people in real conflicts. Today, private military contractors operate all over the world. From providing armed security and training to developing weapon systems and surveillance technology, they've become essential players in global conflicts. The cycle works like this. Conflict creates demand for weapons and security services. Defense companies profit and expand their influence. Their lobbying shapes policy towards more militarized solutions. Those solutions create new conflicts, which generate more demand, starting the cycle again. What makes the system so insidious isn't just its scale, but its necessity to the broader economy. Pension funds invest in defense stocks. Employment in many communities depends on military contracts. Universities rely on defense funding for research. And this has expanded far past the imperial core and finds its way in many other countries. When your retirement account grows because of escalating conflicts, when your community's jobs depend on producing weapons, when your country's GDP relies on arms exports, violence becomes structurally necessary to economic stability and thereby shifting the Overton window of what is a necessary evil.
War has changed. When the battlefield is under total control, war becomes routine.
War is good for a military-industrial complex, but so is peace, if it's done in a way that is unequal. Just as war needs arms to keep the fighting going, peace needs to be maintained or secured in order for it to last. This means that arms contracts are replaced with security contracts.
この番組はご覧のスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Military bases on foreign lands need to be serviced and kept at the ready to act a check and balance of peace. Heck, a lot of times you don't even need a war. Want to oppress your own people and keep them under tyrannical rule? Are your former colonies getting some dumb ideas about nationalization or natural resources? Do you need to send some pew-pews to the enemy of your enemy as a part of mutual security cooperation deal? Boy, do we have a deal for you. You get the picture. Yet with all this obsession on stocks, balance sheets, and numbers, what's most unsettling isn't that a video game predicted our reality. Is that our reality has fulfilled its darkest predictions so completely that we've normalized what should horrify us. Metal Gear asked us to question a world where war becomes business. The question is whether we're still capable of imagining alternatives.
America's diseased, rotten to the core. There's no saving it. We need to pull it out by the roots. Wipe the slate clean. Burn it down!
Metal Gear Rising Senator Armstrong is a peculiar villain. On the surface, he criticizes America's corruption, but his solution? More extreme exceptions for America, where the powerful enforce their will without constraint. Sounds familiar? America just got placed in the Negative Freedoms Index, by the way. I mean, yeah, you can be forcibly disappeared for saying something the government doesn't like now. If you protest for or against certain groups, you are tagged by AI facial recognition systems and then denied jobs, opportunities, or heck, even arrested the next day. Big Brother truly is watching over there in the land of the not-so-free and the home of billionaires.
Like the good old days after 9/11!
This cartoonish monologue about strength and freedom might seem like over-the-top satire, till you compare it to real-world statements from actual political figures.
This court is built for Africa and for thugs like Putin, was what one senior leader told me.
Palestine is not a state under international law, and the Rome Statute doesn't apply to Israel or the United States or France or Germany or Great Britain because it wasn't conceived to come after us.
This isn't a video game villain. This is a sitting U.S. Senator explicitly stating that international law applies to some countries but not to others, that there are rules for them but not for us. This idea has a name, American exceptionalism, the belief that America stands outside the constraints that apply to other nations, that its actions are inherently just because of who is performing them, not because of what those actions are. You've likely heard political leaders invoke the rules-based international order, but notice the key distinction. They're not calling for a laws-based order or simply international law. Rules can be selectively enforced. Rules can have exceptions. What makes Armstrong compelling as a villain isn't just his strength or power. It's that his ideology, might makes right, the powerful determine what's acceptable, is essentially the unspoken principle behind much of the current post-World War II international relations order. When powerful nations bomb others, it's a strategic operation. When others do the same, it's terrorism. The same action is interpreted entirely differently based on who performs it. And not only is the right to violence exclusive to the hegemony, but it has arguably also been celebrated as an act of justice or a natural conclusion. In her book, The Right to Maim, scholar Jasbir Puar describes how certain powers claim not just the right to kill, but to deliberately injure populations, creating permanent disabilities that require ongoing management, effectively weaponizing care itself. This concept plays out when conflict zones become testing grounds for new weapons technologies. Gaza and Ukraine have both been described as laboratories for weapon systems. Actual human beings become unwilling test subjects for the next generation of military technology. The empire-certified framing of this is aiding and tending to the underserved and vulnerable communities of, quote, lower-income countries. Do you know what these are? Exhibit A. These are known as butterfly bullets, used in order to shatter the organs they hit, ensuring that any injury will either lead to death or an amputation of a limb. These were heavily used against Palestinian youth in order to create a generation of cripples, less likely to pose a threat as they grow up. Exhibit B. These are the pagers recently used in an attack against Hezbollah operatives. They exploded in civilian areas, injuring and killing many innocents in their attempt to target operatives. The hegemonic part in these very violent and borderline cruel acts emanate from the fact that world systems are used to justify these obviously horrific attacks. Global media reframes and justifies these atrocities. Any opposing source of facts is labeled as terrorist-supported. Laws and bylaws are written up to create lists of designations for countries and organizations, economic sanctions, and predatory interest loans are enacted without hesitation. This type of violence, its cruelty, scale, execution, justification, and later normalization, is why it can only be described as hegemonic. And it's all fueled by the world's biggest hegemon, Uncle Sam. Metal Gear Rising gives us another example of hegemonic violence, a very cruel one. So there is this bloodthirsty tyrant called Sundowner, who runs a PMC called Desperado. They are the main villains in the game, and are of course funded by the true main villain in the game, Senator Armstrong. This is absolutely not anything like America's relationship with its closest ally and best friend. Desperado is running something called the Sears program, a program designed to manufacture child soldiers for the reawakening of the war economy. Desperado cooperated with the local mafia to abduct children, namely street beggars, through human trafficking, by tricking them into thinking that they'll be hired into a well-paying job. After they placed the bait, the children were then thrown into a boat to be taken to a Desperado-owned research facility. Desperado's researchers, upon receiving the children, then proceed to surgically remove the children's brains and install them onto mechanical cyborg head casings. The remaining bodies post-surgery were sold in black market organ trafficking. Again, nothing at all like America's closest ally.
לא נוגעים, משאירים שלם את החייל, מאוד חשוב, אבל לוקחים מאחרים. ממי? אז עכשיו השאלה מי, תדמיינו ממי לוקחים. בתקופות מסוימות לקחו מפלסטינאים, ואחר כך זה היה עולים חדשים, עובדים זרים.
זה נחשב בנק גדול ביחס לעולם?
זה הכי גדול בעולם.
הכי גדול בעולם?
כן.
Harvesting the organs of the prisoners they unlawfully detained from amongst the population they are actively subjugating and occupying. After a certain time period, they are then shipped by the mafia to a medical facility for treatment, where they are then placed into adoption by the mafia. Due to loopholes regarding human rights laws and the arms trade treaty that allow the children to be considered humans, despite lacking their bodies. The children were then placed into VR training, which was then specifically modeled after Sears' methods of training child soldiers during the Liberian Civil War. The same environment where Raiden was trained as a child soldier to train and kill innocents. Upon graduating the class, the children were then given new cyborg bodies and shipped off to the next active combat zone. Again, we can't stress this enough. This is absolutely nothing like a certain defense force that practically forces all of its youth to enlist, train, serve, and graduate from it, and is also funded by America. American militarism continues regardless of which party controls government. The defense budget grows whether Democrats or Republicans hold power. Foreign policy remains remarkably consistent despite seemingly dramatic political differences domestically. What Metal Gear recognized is that hegemony is not just individual leaders or specific policies. It's a system that perpetuates itself, with its own logic and momentum, regardless of who appears to be in charge. Like Snake and Raiden, we often find ourselves trapped within systems we recognize as destructive. We critique American exceptionalism while accepting its basic premises. We condemn violence while considering some forms of it necessary or inevitable. When violence becomes the context rather than the content, we lose the ability to question its fundamentally.
The weak will be purged, and the strongest will thrive, free to live as they see fit. They'll make America great again!
Life isn't just about passing on your genes. We can leave behind much more than just DNA. Through speech, music, literature, and movies, what we've seen, heard, felt, anger, joy, and sorrow. These are the things I will pass on. That's what I live for.
Metal Gear ends with a moment of quiet hope, not in the destruction of the entire system, but a recognition that even within constrained circumstances, choices remain possible. We've seen how Metal Gear's fiction illuminates our reality, how war became business, how context controls our understanding, how violence becomes normalized through hegemony. So what do we do with this knowledge? How do we respond when we recognize these systems at work? First, we recognize. Awareness itself is powerful. The Patriots system, like our own media ecosystem, works best when invisible. Simply seeing the context that shapes our understanding creates the possibility of questioning it. There is a reason why it's called shadow banning. When consuming media, whether news, entertainment, or social content, ask yourself, what context am I being asked to accept? What questions are framed as unaskable? What alternatives are presented as unimaginable? This doesn't mean rejecting all information or falling into a cynical detachment. It means developing what media scholars call critical media literacy, the ability to recognize framing, context, and perspective. Reminder that the Pentagon has a dedicated unit that works with Hollywood whenever a movie is released features the US military. Oh, and that Top Gun had army recruiters outside the theaters. Oh shit, really?
Since we might be going to war again to make the rich man richer while securing our strategic interests in the region, it's time we talked about Netflix and the CIA. In this great documentary that dropped last month, weird timing? I don't know. American Manhunt, Osama bin Laden, featuring rare footage and interviews with CIA insiders. This edgy documentary will totally revise the global war on terror, which killed millions of people, overthrew governments, turned Libya into a failed state, and washed trillions of dollars of taxpayer money out of the public sector into the private. 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. American Manhunt, Osama bin Laden, and like 5 other movies, like Battleship Potemkin. See, it's a really good documentary that reduces 20 years of warfare to 9/11 and the hunt for Osama bin Laden. Also, why are the directors Israeli, who have also done documentaries, revisionist documentaries on the Oslo Accord? Just be vigilant and call out state-sponsored propaganda when you see it.
Second, we seek out and support alternatives to the dominant systems. Independent journalism that questions accepted frameworks. Community organizations that operate outside profit-driven models. Mutual aid networks that demonstrate different ways of meeting human needs. Third, we create counter-narratives. One of Metal Gear's most powerful insights is that stories shape reality. The Patriots understood this. They sought to control the stories society tells itself. We can respond by telling different stories, ones that imagine possibilities beyond endless conflict and commodification. Metal Gear's heroes faced systems that seemed all-powerful. We face similar challenges. The war economy, context control, and hegemonic violence aren't abstract concepts. They're real systems shaping our world. Recognizing them doesn't guarantee we can overthrow them completely, but it creates possibilities for resistance, for alternatives, and for different choices. The Patriots in Metal Gear feared one thing above all, that people would think for themselves, connect with one another, and imagine different possibilities. They knew that their true vulnerability wasn't to weapons, but collective conscience itself. The systems we've discussed share that vulnerability. When we see, when we question what we're told to accept, when we connect with others doing the same, we create spaces where different futures become possible. Metal Gear asked us to wake up. What will we do now that we're awake?